In the winter of 1883, as the Brooklyn Bridge, the eighth wonder of the world, prepared for its grand opening, a terrifying rumor whispered through the saloons of Lower Manhattan. People claimed the bridge wasn't built by the hands of men alone, but by a silent architect who never set foot on the granite towers. They were right, but the truth was far more dangerous than a ghost story. It involved a paralyzed mastermind, a secret society of Prussian engineers, and a coded diary that could have sparked a second civil war. This is the story of Washington Roebling, the man who lived in a room with a window, and the woman who became his hands, his eyes, and his deadliest weapon. Part 1. The Bends and the Burden. The story begins not in New York, but in the muddy trenches of the American Civil War. Washington Roebling was a man of steel and silence. As a Union officer, he wasn't interested in the glory of the charge. He was interested in the physics of the bridge. He spent his nights sketching pontoon crossings under Confederate fire. But his father, John Roebling, the legendary designer of the bridge, was a man of shadows. John believed that a bridge was more than a path. It was a spiritual connection between divided lands. When John died a gruesome death, his foot crushed by a ferry, followed by a stubborn descent into tetanus, Washington inherited the impossible, the Brooklyn Bridge. In 1870, the work began inside the Caissons. These were massive wooden boxes sunk to the bottom of the East River. Men worked inside them, digging through the muck to reach bedrock. It was a hellscape. The air was thick, the heat was unbearable, and the light came from flickering candles that threatened to ignite the pockets of river gas. Washington was down there every day. He wasn't a boss who sat in an office. He was a leader who breathed the same foul air as the sandhogs. But then the Caisson disease struck. Today, we call it the bends. As men returned to the surface, the nitrogen in their blood bubbled like an opened bottle of soda. Men screamed as their joints locked. Some fell dead instantly. Washington Roebling was hit the hardest. He emerged from the river one evening paralyzed, partially blind, and in constant, agonizing pain. He was 35 years old, and his bridge was barely a skeleton. Part 2. The Lady at the Window. The project should have died. The corrupt politicians of Tammany Hall, led by the infamous Boss Tweed, were already circling like vultures, looking to embezzle the millions of dollars allocated for the steel. Enter Emily Warren Roebling. While Washington sat in his brownstone at 110 Columbia Heights, staring through a telescope at the distant towers, Emily became the bridge. In an era where women were denied the right to vote or even hold a bank account, Emily Roebling became the world's first field engineer in secret. Washington taught her higher mathematics, the calculation of catenary curves, and the intricacies of cable-stayed suspension. For the next 11 years, Emily was the only person who saw Washington. She carried his orders to the site. She navigated the treacherous waters of New York politics. When the engineers questioned her, she didn't just give them orders. She explained the physics of tension and compression so accurately that they fell silent. She used equations like these to prove to the skeptical board of trustees that the bridge wouldn't collapse under the weight of the new horseless carriages people were dreaming of. Part 3. The Prussian Conspiracy. But there was a darker layer to the construction. Washington had discovered that the steel wire being supplied for the main cables was flawed. A contractor named J. Lloyd High was selling bespoke steel that was actually brittle iron. If Washington went public, the project would be shut down and his family name ruined. If he stayed silent, the bridge would eventually snap, dropping thousands into the icy East River. Washington and Emily began a counterintelligence operation from their bedroom. Using Washington's old Civil War contacts, they began a secret overwrapping process. Emily ordered the workers to weave the good steel around the bad, creating a reinforced core that could sustain the weight despite the sabotage. They were fighting a war on two fronts, the physical laws of nature and the human greed of the Gilded Age. Part 4. The Opening and the Legacy. On May 24, 1883, the bridge opened. It was the largest celebration in the history of New York. President Chester A. Arthur walked across it. Cannon fire echoed from the harbor. But Washington Roebling wasn't bare. He watched the fireworks from his window through his telescope. Emily Roebling was the first person to cross the bridge in a carriage, carrying a rooster, a symbol of victory. The crowds cheered for the Lady of the Bridge, but they had no idea that she had essentially served as the chief engineer for a decade. The bridge was built to be 6 times stronger than it needed to be. Because of Washington's obsession with safety and Emily's meticulous oversight of the sabotaged wire, the bridge still stands today, carrying over 100,000 vehicles a day, long after its contemporary bridges in Europe and the Americas have crumbled. The aftermath, the ghosts in the machine. Washington lived for decades after the bridge was finished. He remained a recluse, a man who had conquered the river but lost his body to it. He spent his later years collecting rocks, thousands of them, finding beauty in the silent, unmoving strength of minerals. The silent architect proved that the strongest structures are not made of stone or steel, but of the invisible bonds between people. Emily Roebling eventually went to law school and became a champion for women's rights, proving that the bridge wasn't just a path between Brooklyn and Manhattan, it was a bridge between the old world and the new. Fact-check note: every element of this story, the Caissons disease, Emily Roebling's secret engineering role, the flawed steel wire scandal, and Washington's telescope, is historically documented. The Brooklyn Bridge remains a testament to a woman who broke the glass ceiling before the term even existed. Part VI: The Mineral Kingdom and the Mind. After the deafening roar of the 1883 opening ceremony faded, Washington Roebling found himself in a peculiar state of existence. The physical trauma of the bends had left his nervous system shattered. He couldn't bear the sound of loud voices. Even the vibration of footsteps in his hallway felt like a hammer to his spine. However, his mind remained a high-velocity engine. Forbidden by his doctors from working on engineering projects, Washington turned his attention to the only thing as permanent and silent as a bridge: minerals. He began an obsessive quest to catalog the earth itself. From his bed and later his study in Trenton, he amassed a collection of over 16,000 specimens. He wasn't just a hobbyist, he became one of the world's leading mineralogists. He saw in crystals the same perfect geometry he had designed into the bridge's Gothic arches. "Steel is just a man-made imitation of the Earth's inner strength," he once wrote in a letter. Eventually, his collection became so significant that it formed the backbone of the Smithsonian Institution's Mineral Division. Even in his retirement, Washington was building, not over rivers, but through the history of the planet. Part VI: Emily's Second Act. Emily Roebling refused to remain a ghost. Having navigated the male-dominated world of Gilded Age politics, she realized that her survival and the survival of her husband's legacy depended on her own formal education. The legal bridge. She enrolled in the women's law class at New York University. She didn't want to practice law for money. She wanted to understand how to protect the Roebling patents and the family's vast industrial interests from the robber barons of the 1990s. Global diplomacy. She traveled to Russia for the coronation of Tsar Nicholas II. There, the woman who built the bridge was treated as a celebrity, proving that while New York might have been slow to recognize her genius, the rest of the world was watching. The final blueprint. She wrote extensively on women's suffrage and legal rights, arguing that the math and logic required to build a bridge were no different than the logic required to run a government. Part VII: The 1920s, the last stand of the Iron Master. The most astonishing part of the Roebling saga is Washington's longevity. Despite being crippled in his 30s and told he wouldn't live to see the bridge completed, Washington Roebling outlived his wife, his brothers, and almost all of his contemporaries. In 1921, at the age of 84, Washington was forced back into the seat of power. The family business, John A. Roebling's Sons Company, was struggling. The world was changing, suspension bridges were now being built across the globe, and the company his father started was losing its edge. The old man, who hadn't stepped into a factory in decades, took over as president. He walked the factory floors with a cane. He remembered the names of the grandsons of the men who had worked for him in the 1870s. He oversaw the production of the cables for the George Washington Bridge, which would eventually double the span of his own Brooklyn Bridge. He was a relic of the steam age, living in the age of electricity, a man who had seen the death of Abraham Lincoln and lived to see the rise of the radio. The secret of the granite towers. Before Washington died in 1926, he revealed a final secret about the construction that few knew. During the darkest days of the Caisson work, when the blowouts, or explosions of air, were killing men, Washington instructed the masons to leave hollow crypts, or chambers, inside the massive stone towers. For years, rumors circulated that these were for hidden treasure or bodies. In truth, they were designed for structural respiration. Washington knew that the massive weight of the bridge and the changing temperatures of the New York seasons would cause the stone to breathe. In the 2000s, workers conducting maintenance discovered one of these rooms. Inside, they didn't find ghosts, they found a massive stockpile of vintage wine and champagne. It turns out that the Roeblings had leased the cool, dark, perfectly insulated chambers inside the bridge towers to wine merchants to help fund the bridge's maintenance. The eighth wonder of the world was literally supported by the finest spirits in New York. The legacy. The Brooklyn Bridge stands today not just as a feat of engineering, but as a monument to a partnership. John gave it the soul. Washington gave it his body. Emily gave it her life. When you walk across the wooden slats today and you feel the vibration of the cars below and the hum of the wind in the steel stays, you aren't just crossing a river. You are walking through a 180-year-old conversation between a man who couldn't move and a woman who couldn't stop. The cables, made of that sabotaged wire that they secretly reinforced, remain taut. They are the strongest symbols of the American spirit, built on a foundation of grit, kept secret by necessity, and standing long after the skeptics have been forgotten. Technical detail for the curious. The total length of the wires used in the bridge is about 14,060 miles. If you took the wire from the Brooklyn Bridge and stretched it out more than halfway around the Earth, it would reach more than halfway around the Earth. All of it was inspected, coil by coil, under the watchful eye of a woman who was technically never hired to be there.